I'm Steve McAllister, and this is the Gaming News Canada show presented by Bede Gaming. When this podcast drops on Monday morning of the 13th of July, your humble host will be in Edmonton for what we anticipate will be a very busy opening day of Alberta's regulated sports betting and iGaming market. Alberta becomes the second province in the True North Strong and Free to oversee a competitive regulated gambling industry. Gaming News Canada will be on hand at an event being hosted by the Alberta iGaming Corporation later this morning, and we will also be interviewing stakeholders at a reception later in the day that's being co-hosted by SBC and the Canadian Gaming Association. A note to the loyal subscribers of our newsletter that this week's edition will come out a day earlier on Tuesday. On this episode, we set the table for the new regulated market by speaking with Amanda Brewer, the Senior Vice President of Policy and Communications for the Canadian Gaming Association, and we will be joined later by Rich Taylor, the Director of Responsible Gambling for BetMGM. We welcome back to the podcast after a shockingly long absence, the Canadian Gaming Association's Senior VP of Policy and Communications, Amanda Brewer. Hey, Amanda, when I say long absence, that's on me, not on you.
Oh, Steve, listen, I feel like it was quite all right to give me a bit of a break. I'm still a very enthusiastic reader of all the newsletters you put out, and I always go in and I take a look at all the podcasts you put out. So I'm really happy to share the limelight with other people too. It's all good.
Well, I'm sure you're among the many people excited about next week. And it's funny, when I was doing research for this podcast, I went back to an interview you and I did on the Gaming News Canada show a little more than a year ago. I think probably 15 months ago, where you were talking about frustration from some of the CGA stakeholders with the process, and you cited there that people felt there was a lack of communication with the provincial government in Alberta. And it's funny, I also think back to you and I being at the ICE London conference, I think in 2023, and I'll always remember this story about you and I think watching a panel, and this guy up on stage, I can't remember where he was from now, telling us that the market was going to open in 2023. As crazy as, when you talk about the frustration and you look back at everything, it does kind of feel like this process has been fairly smooth, and that we're at the point now where this market will launch today. It doesn't feel all that surprising or crazy.
No, I think compared with, the first one to go, Ontario, took the longest, but that's fine. You're creating something out of nothing. And I think, to be fair to Alberta, you don't know what you don't know until you actually get into it. And so credit to Minister Nally and his team, because, after they had some initial conversations and became really excited at the possibility of what could be, as Paul Burns loves to say, the art of the possible. I understand your first instinct is to get it done, get it launched ASAP, but you have to almost step back, because you can't necessarily always appreciate everything that goes into creating a set of regulations, creating a regulated market, the licensing, the compliance, all the rest of it. And so I give Alberta full credit, because it feels like once they got their ducks in a row, this went really quickly. And every province is different. Every province has a different set of priorities. Every province has, a different agenda, timeline, way of communicating, procurement process, all the rest of it. So I do think that, all things considered, this has been a very smooth entry. And I think it's going to be a really exciting day on Monday to go out and celebrate with the government of Alberta and Minister Nally and AGLC and AIGC and all the great people and all the operators and suppliers. I think it's going to be really exciting.
When I spoke to when I was at the SBC Summit Canada with you back in May, I mean, with the conversations I had, it was almost unanimous that people were pretty happy with the work done by the AGLC, and particularly the new Alberta iGaming Corporation. And I don't think I heard one bad word said about Dan Keane and his team at that time.
No, I think that it's a testament to, because they've got exactly the right personalities, the right temperaments. They've been engaging, they've been willing to learn, they've been willing to listen, great consultation, and exactly the same. We just had an advocacy call this morning with our CJ members, and there wasn't a peep out of anybody when Paul canvassed them to see if there were any questions or concerns. Nobody raised a hand. So I think that speaks very highly for the level of engagement, both with Dan and his team and Dave Barry on the AGLC side.
Hey man, what involvement, if any, has the CGA had in this process? Like, what role do you kind of play when it comes to the registration process? And obviously, you represent companies across the various sectors of the gambling industries, system providers and suppliers and operators, of course. But what's been your involvement in this process?
So we try to play sort of, I guess, an advice and education role as much as possible. Certainly in the early days, it was to encourage them. It wasn't to adopt the Ontario model. It was always to figure out which model would work best for the province of Alberta, and that's what they've done. But it was to invite them to come and take a look at what Ontario had done, take whatever lessons that they wanted from Ontario, and also to talk to them a little bit about things that, because we've now done it in Ontario, what maybe in hindsight we wished we could have done better or done at all. For example, Alberta has launched a PSA, a public service campaign, to start talking to the public about what's coming, what's changing, what does a regulated iGaming market mean, how does that apply to them, how does that affect them, which is something that Ontario never did. So it's things like that that we're able to, develop the relationships in the province and just talk to them a little bit about what their hopes are for their market, how they see their market unfolding, what kind of market they want to have. So we're really, really proud and pleased as well that Alberta has decided to go full open. So it's a multi-product market. They're not capping the number of operators in the market. So we think that's really great. It's a very similar structure to Ontario. So that's even better, because especially if you've been an operator in Ontario, it's not going to be that heavy a lift to go into Alberta in terms of the standards and regulations. And the hope is, they've publicly commented that they are hoping for a 70% channelization rate before the end of the first year. But I know on behalf of the association, we're optimistic they'll see that a lot sooner. So yeah, full steam ahead for Alberta.
And Amanda, that channelization, do you think that's helped because we've been through this in Ontario already? So there's, there is, I would suggest there's greater brand awareness for Alberta entering this market than there was when Ontario happened back in April 2022.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And, it's the advantage of we've now got a mature market in Ontario. And, again, for better or for worse, there's been the advertising as well. So I do agree with that. But I will also say that VPNs are still a scourge on the regulated market. That's how a lot of the, soon to be by Monday, illegal operators will still have access in Alberta as they're, getting people to download VPNs, bypass the IP, and they're gambling with them. So we're not, wouldn't that be a beautiful world where all of a sudden when regulation comes, there's some magic switch you can flip and all of a sudden unlicensed operators are just booted out of the market? Wouldn't that be great? But hopefully between Alberta's campaign and the fact that operators will be coming in and they'll be identifiable who's regulated and who's not, that should help with the channelization success in that province.
Is there anything you're particularly going to watch or be focused on in the first months of the market there?
Well, in some respects, it's really good they're launching in the summer because we still have months to go before the hockey season starts up, and that's usually when the cranky newspaper articles start up again. But so that's a little bit tongue in cheek. But in a serious note, I think for me, it's really with the RG lens being applied over things and just watching to see what I'm noticing on the meta channels from the licensed operators, because it's we're going to be in the heady days of customer acquisition all over again, so they'll be scrambling to carve out their market share and their customer database, but really hoping that things are going to unfold in a very responsible manner in Alberta, because that legal gambling age is a year younger in that province in Ontario. That's 18. That's pretty young. So yeah, that's really something from my point of view that I'll be keeping an eye on.
Hey, Amanda, speaking of a meta, and it's, I guess, in some respect it's related, in some respect it's not. You've written, you wrote about this not too long ago about the phony casino ads that we've seen in meta platforms. It's something we've covered extensively in the newsletter over the past couple of months. And I wondered, is there an opportunity here? Like, do you think the Alberta government might take a stiffer stance on this, or is there, now that we have two regulated markets, is maybe do Ontario and Alberta join forces, and is there something that can be done with these ads? Because it's still the problem. Like I literally go on Instagram every evening to check in on my kids and their friends, and I'm still getting bombarded with fake casino ads.
Yeah, it is a problem. I know that AGCO is highly aware of it, and the hope is with two markets now regulating, you can have the power of two provinces maybe now pushing Meta. But we did find out just before the House rose in June that Melissa Lantsman has introduced a bill, private members bill, that is taking direct aim at online scams, and that does include these unlicensed casinos, because we have data that we've received that shows the volume of ads that fraudulent ads that Meta allows on their platforms, and also how a lot of these ads are only up for a period of 24, most of them not even 48 hours. So they're live and up. They try to take advantage, scam, get money out of, hook in, whatever, as many people as they can in 24 hours, and then they shut down, and then they pop up somewhere else with a different skin on them, but it's still the same bad actor. So that would certainly be a bill that we would, as an association, throw our full support behind. But I do think that's where the pressure is going to have to come from, is federally, and putting some federal legislation around that, because quite frankly, the tools are there. The geolocation is possible. Checking for licenses is possible. They're just being lazy and greedy. I guess the revenue is too good that they can't be bothered. But when you think about all the people who are being taken advantage of by this, yeah. So I really do hope the federal government takes this up and starts throwing the book at them.
Yeah, and I think you can't trivialize this, because again, people like you and I that are somewhat tech savvy, I'll just speak at my advanced age, like having a chance to cover this industry and just the work that I do, it certainly makes me more tech savvy than my many people in my parents' generation. But yeah, there are a lot of scams out there today, and it's very easy for my mom who's on Instagram, for example, to see what her grandchildren are up to come across a phony casino ad and get sucked in.
Yep, absolutely. And again, the other end of the spectrum, we're highly aware that there's a issue, right now with mental health and young adults, and specifically young men. That's also the last thing that we need, is more bad actors coming in and taking advantage of that population through fraudulent ads that could easily be kept off that platform.
Hey man, just a couple more questions. Just on Alberta, it's interesting. We're recording this podcast on Wednesday, July 8th, and when it drops this morning, we do know, for example, FanDuel has put out a press release that part of their entry in Alberta includes a charitable donation, and DraftKings has a charitable donation as part of their entry in the market. And so it does feel like there's maybe a little shift. I'll let you explain it, but in fairness, again, it was a much April 2022, even though it was only 4+ years ago, was a much different time and a much different set of dynamics than what we have entering the Alberta market. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, because we were coming out of COVID and we were trying to get this market opened, during COVID. And so, it was just you said it properly. It was just a very different time. And now that we're 4 years down the road, COVID, thankfully, in the rearview mirror for us. But I think that because things are way more open and things have, for the large part, bounced back in terms of the entertainment industry, there's a lot more that operators, lessons learned in Ontario, things, or options available to them in Alberta that weren't maybe necessarily available in Ontario. Like, it was brand new. Nobody knew what was going on. I remember when I first met you and Mark, people are trying to find sponsorship deals and figuring out how any of those will work. So certainly operators who've been in that market for a long time, are way more experienced, have a lot more knowledge and understanding. And so I think the launch in Alberta, it's a very different province with a different population. And, it's not going to unfold the same way as Ontario in that sense. But I think they can definitely take some key lessons learned in Ontario, and it will be a much smoother, I think, in some respects, launch in Alberta.
Hey, last question. I don't know how much you want to say about this, but when the Ontario market opened 4 years ago, OLG was kind of in the center of it, and it's to me, it's one of the great stories. If you're someone who would like to see regulated gaming across the country, is the OLG story, where their digital product wasn't, for lack of a better term, wasn't very good. And OLG people, Dave Pridmore and Duncan Hannay and Andrew Darley have been quite open about over the last 4 years, talking about the fact that it really forced them to get their spit together and be better with their digital gambling product. And I'm not sure how much you know about AGLC and the Play Alberta situation, but are there some parallels between OLG and AGLC with these market launches?
Well, Play Alberta has a for sale sign on it, which OLG never has. And the minister, I actually asked him a question when we had the summit, what the plans were for it. And it was one of those things where, it was well known to people in the industry that, if you wanted to come kick the tires, they were happy to have a conversation with you. And if, market launch came and nobody had made a viable offer for it, then I guess they then let it go for a while. But I would expect there might be some news coming, because I can't see how there wouldn't be some interested parties sniffing around Play Alberta. So I think that's the one key difference, which is you have a government that's willing to divest itself of its interest in its lottery corporation, which was not the OLG experience. So it's one of those things that I'm kind of curious of, when you think about, you always hope other provinces are watching, because, the expectation is that the Alberta launch will be successful, and that it will achieve the objectives it's set out to achieve. But they will have done or made a very different decision if they end up selling Play Alberta. So there'll be different models that, other provinces can look at, hang on to your government controlled lottery corporation, or you can sell it and get out of that business and concentrate on other things. So yeah, I would say watch the space, because if there's an announcement to be made, I would assume it would be coming soon.
Hey, just quickly, in last week's newsletter, Dave Briggs kind of did seven predictions for the market in Alberta, and the first one is, I think it's the first one is could Alberta be that domino that sets off other provinces and attracts them to follow Ontario and Alberta's lead? Just some quick thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, listen, we would love BC to be next, given its proximity to Alberta, its population size. That would make a lot of sense. But again, this has to be a government decision. That I'm trotting that one out again, but it has to be a government decision that they want to pursue this. I still see my home province of Quebec digging its feet in for another long number of time. Saskatchewan has reached out, and that's really great, because every province that doesn't have regulation is a great province with lots of activity and, no player protections, no economic development opportunities, no revenue generation. So, any province at this point that reaches out, that's really, really wonderful. And there are certainly models that could even see some of the Atlantic provinces, getting online, even though they don't have huge population sizes, but there are ways that they can be supported if they want to go online. So I think, if I were to be a betting woman, I would think that in the next couple of years, we'll probably see maybe one of the less populous provinces going online. But, I certainly do hope that once Alberta is maybe 6 months or a year into its model and things are working the way they expected it to work, that will be further proof to some of the other governments that have maybe been doubting or waiting and holding back, that this is now the second successful province that's launched, and it's really the low-hanging fruit at this point, for additional economic development or revenue generation for a province.
That is Amanda Brewer, the Canadian Gaming Association Senior Vice President of Policy and Communication. Amanda, thanks as always for doing this, and we look forward to seeing you in Edmonton.
Thanks so much, Steve. It's always a pleasure to join you.
Is your iGaming platform ready for Alberta? Bede Gaming is ready to support your new market entry with a SOC 2 compliant platform, multi-tenant infrastructure model, and unlimited configurability. Future-proof your iGaming performance today with a solid foundation for your next province. Bede Gaming is your partner for success. Get in touch at bedegaming.com. We welcome now to the Gaming News Canada show presented by Bede Gaming, the Director of Responsible Gaming for BetMGM. Hey, Rich, thanks so much for doing this.
Hey, Steve, great to be on the show, and thanks for having me.
Hey, Rich, before we get into the reason why we have you on the podcast, I do want to just ask you quickly. You're a retired corporal in the U.S. Marine Corps, and thank you as a proud Canadian, but also with a lot of family and friends in the U.S. Thank you for your service. But I'm curious how your career path went from serving in the Marine Corps to working in the gambling industry.
There's actually a lot of crossover, believe it or not, between serving in the Marines and now being in the gambling industry. Adaptability is a big one. Being able to take things in stride and to be positive and try to find opportunities to be successful. A lot of these things kind of correlate between both the service and in gaming. But to answer your question, I'm a born and raised Las Vegas kid. So I grew up around this industry, and both of my parents worked in the industry. My mom worked human resources at Harrah's on the Strip, and my dad was a Teamster. So very proud to have grown up around gaming and around this industry. It's given my family personally a lot of opportunities. I know a lot of opportunities to other families who work in this space. And, 9/11 kicked off. I was in high school at the time, and I felt the call to serve, and I wanted to be part of the branch that I knew would find its way into one of the theater of operations. And boy, did I get my wish, Steve. I served in Iraq in 2006, 2007. Some stories for another podcast, perhaps. But after that, I left the service in 2008. And as a lot of Vegas kids do who leave town, I found my way back to Las Vegas and naturally into MGM Resorts after I finished graduating from college here at UNLV. So the lessons that a young person learns while in the service, they carry over to any industry. And so what I would tell anybody who's considering an applicant from the military is don't just look at their job and don't just look at what they did while they were in the service, but look at the intangibles that they developed while they were in and talk about those, because you can teach, somebody with the right attitude and with the right ambition, anything. And so just a little plug there to hire vets if you see one come across your desk and you're hiring.
Yeah, such a great point, Rich. And not to get too far off the beaten path here, but it's something I learned as a manager late in my journalism career is that give me someone with a great attitude, and that's the person I want to hire, because you can always teach them the skill set. And I think that's such great advice for people who are in positions of hiring other people.
Yeah.
Hey, I want to start, Rich. You and I first met at the SBC Summit Canada back in May, and we talked about having you on the podcast. And I think it's really appropriate to have someone from BetMGM on the podcast on opening day for Alberta's regulated market. And we are recording this interview on Thursday, July 9th, and I came across this morning an op-ed that you wrote that have appeared in several publications across Canada. There was one line I saw that caught my eye right away, and the quote is, "For responsible gambling messaging to be effective, it must be heard." And something I've had a lot of guests on the show lately, Rich, who work in the responsible gaming side of the business, and I think that's one of the challenges that's been acknowledged, is that there is a lot of responsible gaming messaging out there, but I wonder sometimes if there's a bit of clutter because messaging is coming from so many different places, and it can be a little bit different. But can you maybe just expand on that quote a little bit for us?
Yeah, I mean, simply put, I think there are a lot of lessons from other public awareness campaigns that we've seen over the decades. Thinking about Say No to Drugs and other notes. And one of the takeaways that's always stuck with me is that when you approach this from a very sterile and kind of negative approach, you lose the audience. And I've been around responsible problem gambling space for a long time. I've met many people who are in recovery And when I've shown them those types of ads that have been used in the past, which were essentially, if you have a problem, call, the helpline or do this, their instinct is, while they were in the depths of going through what they were going through, those messages weren't for them. They didn't have a problem, right? So that's always a natural kind of response and inclination, is that's not for me, that's for somebody else, even though they may be having some thoughts or some doubts about, their ability to continue to gamble in a responsible manner. So that's always stuck with me. And I've always thought that if we were going to do responsible gambling advertising and I was going to be involved in that, it was going to be done differently. And we wanted to talk to the right audience. And so I look at a lot of ads in the past. I look at a lot of messaging, and they all seem like they're designed for, and all due respect to this audience, but they all seem like they're designed for regulators or for officials and for other stakeholders, and not for the audience they need to be designed for. And that's the better. That's who I want to talk to. I want to talk to the people who are actually going to sign up for a BetMGM account, put their hard-earned money into that account, and then bet with us on our platform. And so that was kind of the mission that I gave our marketing team, is forget everything you know about PSAs and public awareness messages, and let's approach this from a different perspective and really try to appeal to the audience that we need to reach. And so through that, the ideas for initially Carried Away, which was our first Connor McDavid commercial that we launched a couple of years ago, and now the new one, Mull It Over, which we launched in December of this past year. And so if you watch those, they're funny, they're entertaining. There are things that jump out at you, and you want to know where the story is going. And I think that's really important. A lot of RG messaging in the past, you watch the first couple of seconds of it, and you immediately go, oh, this is a boring PSA, I'm not going to watch this. But when Connor McDavid shows up to the door and you have Terry Ryan there and he's looking a little perplexed about why Connor McDavid's there, and the story just unwinds, and there's s'mores and there are ice fishing and all these other things that are going on, and then these fabulous mullets, people want to know where the story is going. And then at the end, we hit them with that message, which is think about how you're going to bet before you bet, use our responsible gambling tools, and most importantly, keep gambling a fun and sustainable activity.
And as you point out in the op-ed, Rich, you have seen some success with that with the McDavid campaign, and I think the op-ed mentions that a 38% year-over-year increase in use of deposit limits and a 55% increase in the use of stake limits within the Ontario platform. How were you able to track that data, Rich?
Yeah, so we pulled, before we launched the first Carried Away ad, we looked at our data across all of our responsible gambling tools. And then we came back a year later, and I do want to give a nice plug to IGO and AGCO on this front. There's a requirement for operators in Ontario to submit reports on how these campaigns go. And so that really pushes us and pushes the other operators to do things that are going to be effective. So as part of that, our analysis was to look at the tool usage prior to the launch of the ad and then look at it a year later. And that's where we saw that 38 and 55% increase in those tools. And we continue to see increases in tool usage. I can't give you the specific numbers yet because I just saw the data come across a couple of days ago and we're doing some validation. But we looked at the past 6 months and we're seeing increases across the board for our tools. Now, I do want to caution correlation, causation. Obviously, you can have these arguments. What leads a person to sign up for a tool? Was it the fact that we gave them a pop-up upon registration, or that we're doing pop-ups periodically as they play with us, or that they watched the commercial during a hockey game? It's hard to determine what this was. And so I think collectively doing all of these things helps. But seeing somebody like Connor McDavid talk about this in a positive way, my belief, and I think our belief here at BetMGM, is that is going to give people some confidence that the tool is for them. And hopefully that connection with that athlete or with that ambassador gives them that confidence to say, you know what, just like I put my seatbelt on in the car every day, I'm going to set my deposit limit. And this is for me, and it's going to help me, keep my experience fun and sustainable. So we are noticing increases in tool usage just across the board in general. And hopefully that will continue as we continue to leverage Connor and these ads.
Yeah, and I think it's important, Rich, just to point out for our audience too that when the Ontario Mall opened 4 years ago, there was some backlash to the advertising involving an athlete. So the AGCO called an audible, and I think in 2024 put in a new regulation that athletes could no longer be used except in responsible gaming messaging, and that's Alberta's adopted that same framework, I believe. It's interesting that the McDavid partnership, it feels to me like it's both an opportunity and a challenge in Alberta, where you have someone who obviously a high profile hockey player across the NHL, but playing in an Alberta market, where the spotlight's really on Connor. But at the same time, it's a great opportunity to use his brand to get across that responsible gambling messaging. And I'm sure you can't get into a lot of detail, but I'm sure you've had conversations with Judd Moldaver, McDavid's agent, and the marketing team there about how you use McDavid in the new market.
Yeah, I can't get into specific details, and I'm sure Scott Woodgate can fill you in on that. But one thing that's really shown through the conversation is how much he cares about Albertans and how much he cares about working with a company that is genuine in their attempts to create a safe environment for those Albertans who choose to gamble. And I noticed that on the set of the commercials. I happened to have the opportunity to be there and be an on-set consultant, which is kind of cool for a responsible gambling guy to do. But he genuinely cares, and he wants to get this right. And he wants to make sure that the message is resonating, and he pushes BetMGM to really elevate our game in this space. And so that's been a constant throughout this experience of working with him and his team is we have to do this right, and we have to be genuine because, it's his name, it's our name. And most importantly, it's the safety of those who choose to bet with BetMGM. And we want to make sure that we're putting them at the forefront.
Hey, Rich, I do wonder, and again, this is probably, I've likely beaten this one to death, but I'll beat it one more time. And I do wonder if there is an opportunity for messaging. And it's great to hear that the use of humor, that you're seeing results from that. But I also wonder at the same time if there's room for some more sober thought messaging. And in Alberta, the legal betting age is 18, which is a year younger than Ontario. So there's going to be an opportunity for young people who aren't out of high school yet to be using online gaming operators. And I always go back when I first started covering this industry 5 years ago. I remember Caesars having a Peyton Manning PSA, just sitting down at a kitchen table and having a real sober 30-second conversation on problem gambling and the need to be mindful of when you gamble. And I just wanted to get your thoughts on that. Yeah,
no, listen. Audiences, bettors, they're all in different parts of their journey. And so with that comes an opportunity and really an obligation to create messaging that's going to fit each and every one of them. And I hear you on that. I think it's very important for anyone in this space to be able to talk frankly about problem gambling and what that looks like. It's one of the reasons why we've been a long time partner with Epic Global Solutions, who provide lived experience education sessions to our employees on a biannual basis. Every twice a year, we're bringing them in to talk about their story. But for us, when it comes to the public messaging, we also looked at the market and we saw that there is a lot of that exists, either through public health messaging and other vehicles. And so rather than adding on to that, what we noticed is that there was a real lack of positive and proactive responsible gambling messaging. And so that's why our strategy and our focus has been on that side of it. Was we want to make sure that our players know from the start, these are the things you need to do to bet responsibly and hopefully avoid and prevent some of those issues that can occur. And then those messages can talk to that audience who unfortunately do go down that path. So for us, that was always our focus and our strategy. Am I saying we're not going to talk about those things or we're not going to put out those types of messaging? No, but right now, what we really want to focus on, especially in newer markets like Alberta, is making sure our players understand what they need to do to protect themselves from the beginning through our tools, through self-awareness, through using the game sense information, and hopefully set them off on the right path early on so that we can prevent a lot of those things from occurring.
That's a perfect segue to my next question. There's so much noise around advertising, and I think we've already seen the coverage leading up to the opening of the Alberta market that continues to be a focal point. I think what gets overlooked sometimes, or not, there's not the realization that operators do have a lot of internal tools, and when you register for an account, there is pretty prominent responsible gaming messaging and those tools that you mentioned. In BetMGM's case, you've had a long-standing relationship with BCLC and its GameSense product. I just wonder, Rich, if you can walk our audience just about that experience, because again, we have people listening to this podcast, mainstream media reporters who aren't covering the industry on a daily basis, people who are newcomers to the industry and might not be aware of those tools when you sign up for a sportsbook / iGaming account.
Yeah, sure thing. I can't say enough good things about BCLC and the work that I've been able to do with them. Going back to 2017 when I was still at MGM Resorts, I'm very proud that we were the first commercial operator to voluntarily reach out to BCLC and say, we like what this GameSense program represents. We like that it helps players understand how to bet responsibly in a clear and easy way to understand. And so we would like to bring that program across our portfolio of properties in North America and in the US. And so I was part of that team that helped roll that out. I did the trainings with the employees across all the properties. And the one thing that really stood out to me, especially with the seasoned gaming employees, I'm talking 20, 30 years in the industry, they've done and seen it all when it comes to gambling, was their expression of, wow, this makes it a lot easier to have the conversation with our players. I don't feel intimidated anymore because I'm able to approach it from a more positive angle and not just immediately jump to problem gambling and my concerns and these things, which can be very challenging and difficult to talk to a player about. They felt more at ease and more comfortable having those conversations, which helps them develop stronger relationships with the guests. And so that's always stuck out to me. And I give the BCLC a lot of credit for creating a program that does that doesn't just stick to the norm of these are the problem gambling warning signs. And if you feel any of these things, call the helpline or sign up for self-exclusion. No, they want to talk to you at the beginning of the experience and say, here are the ways that you can protect yourself. So hopefully you don't need to use any of those items. And so when I jumped over to BetMGM, in 2020, one of the very first things that I recommended is that we need to get this program into our platform and create a digital version of that experience and give our employees the same type of confidence and tool to have those expressions and have those conversations with the players here via chat and email and other forms. So GameSense is definitely at the focal point of our responsible gambling approach. It's all about every player playing better and making sure that we are encouraging our bettors to use our responsible gambling tools like deposit limits, loss limits, time limits, including timeout if you need to take a temporary break, all the way up to self-exclusion. But really, it's GameSense that helps drive that messaging across. And it's a brand and it's a program that I really believe in. And I'm very proud that we're going to be able to bring that program into Alberta on our platform when we launch, which I know a lot of Albertans are already familiar with. AGLC has been using it across their properties. And if you've been to an Oilers game recently, you've probably seen GameSense on the Jumbotron and on the ribbons there. And we're excited to bring our flavor of the program there as well.
Hey, Rich, last question. Just on that, I think everybody acknowledges that Alberta has had the benefit of some lessons learned from the Ontario model, and a centralized self-exclusion program is going to be available for market launch. In Ontario, it took 4 years to get there with the BetGuard product. But what is there anything that stands out to you with the Alberta model in terms of of the work you do every day?
No, I think you said it right. Like, they've been able to watch other markets open, and much to their credit, they've studied this and they've asked the right questions of the operators, and I'm sure of the regulators as well. And not every new jurisdiction does that, Steve. Some believe, well, this is our state and this is very unique and we know what we're doing here and this is how it's going to go. And that can be challenging because we have a lot of knowledge, we have a lot of experience, and other regulators have a lot of knowledge and a lot of experience. And so I think the collaborative and educated approach that Alberta is taking here in learning those lessons is going to benefit the market. It's going to benefit the operators, and most importantly, it's going to benefit the Albertans. Because of these requirements, because of the shared self-exclusion being available from the very start, you're going to have a full array of protections in place to help Albertans bet responsibly. And for those who do have a problem, because that will happen, they will have a means to help start to resolve that and hopefully get into recovery by not being able to bet on a licensed and regulated operator through an enrollment through self-exclusion. So I'm very excited about that. I'm also very proud to be part of this launch and be part of the first wave. But most importantly, I'm just really looking forward to getting started and seeing those players roll in and us to send our game sense information to them and to get them betting in a responsible way and hopefully creating some experiences that they'll really enjoy with us.
That is Rich Taylor, the Director of Responsible Gaming for BetMGM. Rich, we met in Toronto. Both Kimberly Palder and Jennifer Airpoff told me you'd be a great guest to get on the podcast, and you delivered as advertised. So really appreciate you doing this, and I do look forward to our paths crossing somewhere down the road.
Excellent, Steve. Thanks for having me, and go Knights, go.
Don't tell it. We won't tell the Oilers fans, Rich. That's it for this episode of the Gaming News Canada show presented by Bede Gaming. Thank you to both Rich Taylor and Amanda Brewer for being our guests on this show. As we mentioned at the top of the podcast, this podcast will drop on Monday morning on the opening day of Alberta's regulated sports betting and iGaming market. We are moving the newsletter to a day earlier this week, so the newsletter will land in your inbox on Tuesday morning. We're so grateful to all of our readers and listeners for supporting Gaming News Canada, and we look forward to seeing everybody again very soon.